Hello and welcome back around the bonfire. It is a pleasure to have you here at the show that reminds you it's never okay to elbow people in the head despite what you see on television. I'm joined once more by two of the best in the business. I've got Tim and DJ with me here today. Tim, how's your Wednesday, my man?
Well, so far better than my Tuesday was since I didn't have to watch a guy elbow somebody in the face for no apparent reason. But hey, I guess there's still time for that to happen.
Look, at least this time we're pretty sure it wasn't on purpose. DJ, terrifying background you have. You guys should be thankful we don't have video today. How are you feeling?
I mean, I was going to make a joke about elbowing someone in the face at my job today, but I don't know how to respond. You completely throw me off.
Well, that's good because we don't want anybody elbowing anybody in the face at work, especially if your name is Omar Gonzalez, right? But if you don't understand what we're alluding to, Chicago Fire lost an Open Cup last night against Minnesota United. Last night, as of recording, of course, that was Tuesday evening. In part due to an errant elbow thrown to the jaw of Julian Gressel by Chicago Fire center back Omar Gonzalez. They ended up falling 3-1 after a couple of extra time goals after the team made a pretty heroic attempt to pull that game back despite playing 65 minutes down a man in regular time, not even to count the extra time. Talk about that and a little bit more today as well. Chicago Fire are also set to welcome San Diego FC to Soldier Field for the first time ever. So exciting stuff there. But just a very slight touch of news. One, the United States men's national team did lose in the Gold Cup final to Mexico, which I think we all could have seen coming, being as they didn't start Chris Brady, right? I think we all expected start Chris Brady, you win the game. We actually saw his incredible shot-stopping performances on last night. Shout out Chris Brady. Anyway.
And yet the team still lost the game. So, hey, what says a lot about all the goalies can control.
Well, okay. Where was the United States also playing with 10 men, Tim?
To be fair, if it weren't for Chris Brady, it would not have been a 3-1 game.
That is very true, DJ, and that is a wonderful way of transitioning us back into what matters, which is just a little bit of recap on the game at hand. We talked about it a touch. Omar Gonzalez did concede that red card against Minnesota in the 25th minute on what we believe, I think, was an unintentional elbow to the face of Julian Gressel. It was definitely a rough look for Omar there, but knowing the kind of person he is, we'd hope not. Then about 2 minutes later, Philip Zinkernagel draws a penalty just inside the box. Brian Gutierrez converts the penalty. The Fire are flying high briefly. They take the lead, the 1-0 lead into the halftime, and then Minnesota scores quickly after half. Robin Lode scoring the equalizer, and Kelvin Yeboah scoring the eventual winner after the game goes to extra time. He scores the 95th minute and then the 120th minute off a somewhat questionable penalty kick after Leonardo Barroso made a rough play in the box. Game was likely over at that point regardless. But nonetheless, we'll start with, I think, what has dominated talks today and mostly last night, and that being the obvious, Omar Gonzalez's red card. Great point here made in the notes, right? Clearly a red, even if it wasn't intentional. You ask yourself, what was the play there? What was the move? Two MLS vets kind of going back at each other there between Gressel and Gonzalez. And I think the place to start here, Tim, I'll kind of toss to you because I think we're going to take different sides. This is like, are we starting to see some discipline issues under Greg Berhalter, right? Because we've seen Brian Gutierrez go out multiple times due to this exact thing, right? Once a post-game issued suspension, once a red card, then a suspension to follow. We've seen guys like Jay Davia who have played incredibly physical. He did ultimately get a red card once, though it was rescinded. But again, Mauricio Pineda has already served a suspension for yellow card accumulation. That was probably 4 or 5 games ago at this point, so well before the halfway point of the season. The question needs to be asked, and so Tim, I'll toss to you on how you feel. Yeah, in that realm.
You know, honestly, I was thinking about it. It's also worth saying the team has 46 yellow cards, which puts them in the upper third in MLS. I think that it's tied for 9th overall in the league. The most is 56 and the fewest is 28 with Columbus, I think is 28. So or maybe it's 26. So in any case, the Fire are up there in yellow cards. I think that Brian Gutierrez has had a disciplinary problem. I think it's been mental on his part, and I think that that's tainting the numbers. I think outside of that, right, as makeshift as the center back pairings have sometimes been, we haven't really seen overly aggressive play from them or frustration cards like we'd seen from the Fire in previous seasons a lot. And I think that says something. So I think that there's not a lot there. I mean, 3 red cards is still up there in MLS this time of year. And obviously there's now that red card in the Open Cup that, I think it's certainly changed the game. I don't think we can pretend that we know what would have happened afterwards if the red card hadn't happened.
Yeah, 100%. I think the ironic thing there, like you mentioned, the note about the yellow cards. Philadelphia has the most in the league, right? So best team in the league, leads with 58 yellow cards. So a lot of yellow cards isn't necessarily an issue as long as you're not committing 2 in a game, right? I got to be honest, like I kind of floated this a little bit, and I think maybe I'll get some pushback on it. I certainly have in other realms. Like this whole thing to me has felt a little bit like a nothing burger. Like it sucks in the moment. Of course, in the moment, as somebody who watches the team, who supports the team, it's incredibly frustrating. It is a boneheaded 20-year-old play from a 36-year-old MLS veteran in Omar Gonzalez, who has, they mentioned on the broadcast, like done everything you can possibly do in American soccer. He just has, right? But that's kind of all it was. I don't see this as a larger trend for the Fire, right? I agree with you in that I think Brian Gutierrez specifically has a kind of temperament issue that we've seen come to roost throughout his career, right? We saw Frank Klopas sitting him at certain points during his tenure. So it feels like a little bit of a nothing burger in that, like, this sucks for one game.
Yeah, just the one thing I will push back a little bit against that is that I think that we're hoping that the issue with Brian Gutierrez it's too early to say that it's done and dusted, but we're hoping that this has been a learning experience for him. Like he hasn't gotten sent off in games like this previously. He hasn't been relied on to do the same job. And I'm thinking that like there's a good chance that that's in the rearview mirror, especially now that he's had to sort of play now with, seeing the consequences of how that changed the game. So many times, including with I think this was a winnable game. I know I said we don't know what could happen. It wasn't at all unlikely that the Fire would have come out with a result, right? So hopefully this is a no longer an issue with him. I don't want to make it sound like it's necessarily current, and that's the only pushback.
I also feel like it needs to be added on. One thing that's worth noting: the Fire, you are going to have a team if it's playing defensively well. They are going to get fouls. They're going to get yellows. They are going to get reds. This is going to happen. The problem comes when the reds are stupid and completely nonsensical like they have been for years past. Guti had those red cards. Brady's red, if I remember correctly, wasn't really all that one way or the other. But like if you're just getting sent off for the sake of getting sent off, all of Steven Lenhart in his heyday, then that's a different story. But that's not what they're doing right now. These are tactical fouls for the most part.
Yeah, and I think that's what happened here. Omar Gonzalez was jostling for position, which is what's going to happen on any set piece, and he jostled the wrong way. So careless, sure. I don't think that it was intentionally harmful. That's not the guy that he is. It's not the guy that he's been. So
it's literally his first straight red card, at least at the club level in his entire life.
And I looked it up also at the national team level.
Yeah.
And the only other red that he had as a professional of any kind was 2 yellows against the Seattle Sounders on, I can look up the date, but it was towards the end of the 2014 season. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like this is just Omar Gonzalez, like Julian Gressel, just completely him, Omar Gonzalez. This was just like Gressel got the better. Like end of story. Gonzalez should have played better, but also he should have done the play better, but also Gressel definitely took advantage of it.
100%. And I think one thing it's important to say, right, because I've seen a lot of Omar Gonzalez slander, which feels like an insane thing to say and then try to combat, to be totally honest, from where I was probably 4 months ago on this. But like Omar Gonzalez was playing really well before this, which almost makes it worse. It's like, oh my gosh, we're starting Omar Gonzalez. Don't love that. And then you see his play on the field, and they even made the comment on the broadcast, like he is playing maybe the best game of his season. Certainly his best game in a Chicago Fire shirt to that point. And it's a little bit of salt in the wound of like, Tim, you made the point there, like, was the game winnable? Maybe, maybe not. Like, prior to that, that game felt like one that the Fire had a very good opportunity to compete in. And even to your point of like post that moment, it did still feel like there was an opportunity there. We saw some very threatening moments. And I think that actually kind of brings us to the second half of this conversation, which is once again, I personally, right? I think we'll probably disagree quite a bit here, but like I left this game feeling like Greg Berhalter left meat on the bone in terms of his tactical decisions. We'll start from the top, being the lineup that was rolled out. That starting 11 was heavily rotated. We'll talk a little bit more about in-game. The one thing I would like to say about this, if you told me we have to face 2 top 5 teams in the league in a span of 4 days, one of which will be, or both of which will be away. One is just a league game.
No, one is it. One is home. Well, are you talking about the game on against Cincinnati? Okay.
Yeah, Cincinnati and Cincinnati, Minnesota. Excuse me.
Sure.
I should have been more clear. Both games away. One is a just normal league game mid-season. One is a cup quarterfinal, and I am starting my starters in one of them. I cannot imagine why on earth it would be the league game against the better team, frankly. I don't think it's crazy to say Cincinnati is a better team than Minnesota, though they're in the same kind of stratosphere of MLS right now. So to see a very, very heavily rotated side, right? Jay Davia starting and playing over 90 minutes. Sam Williams making another start. I didn't quite understand that. I mean, I get it from the perspective of you want to give your guys rest, but knowing that Minnesota has an extra day of rest, knowing that that game in Cincinnati went about how you would expect it to, right? Not that you want to walk in anywhere with the idea of you're not going to win, but if you're going to kind of punt on either one, why are you punting on the cup game? It was incredibly frustrating from Jump Street for me.
I will say, I said this on Twitter. This lineup looks exactly like what I would expect from Greg. If Greg said, this is going to be a game where it's either going to end in the second half or we're going straight to PKs. And this is the other thing to go back with the Gonzalez red card. The thing that I think ruined everything was the lineup was doing well even through the 45 minutes. The only problem was that you had to take Martin Celeste off to put Sam Rogers on. That was the thing that I think kind of started the cacophony of problems that came later. Was Rogers was not expected.
We can talk about the subs in a minute,
yeah.
I think, but I think that like just to focus on the starting 11, I fully agree with you on that. I think that it makes more sense. I mean, I think that it's okay to do some rotation, right? Like I wouldn't have minded if, like, for example, Jonathan Dean had started against, Cincinnati and in this game, or we had, like stuff like that, right? Where you've got two options that I think are both good, pluses and minuses between, I think, Dean and Barroso. And, I could be persuaded that either would be the appropriate starter for either match, right? But some of the other choices, like, we haven't seen Sam Williams in a long time. He's played, I mean, I've said this a number of times, he's done way more than anyone expected him to do in 2025. And that's been impressive, but he is still not a, high level MLSer, and he may never be, but it's certainly not fair to expect that of him right now. Jay Davia, we just talked about in the last podcast, like we haven't seen a lot from him. Whatever the promise or potential may be, it's so far kind of been elusive. And, so I think that those are two at the very beginning. And then I think the other thing is going back to the decisions made in the Cincinnati game, right? And this is an issue that's dogged sort of Berhalter's reputation since, even back in his days in Columbus and followed him through the U.S. men's national team. He sort of is not quite like Potch level late to get to the bench, but he sometimes delays getting players off or getting players on. And there were not substitutes made until the 73rd minute against Cincinnati, and that was Barroso and Gutierrez off. And then, Jonathan Bamba played 84 minutes. Philip Zinkernagel played 90 minutes. Like, it just seems like there were, if you were going to have to preserve legs and rotate, you could have said, Jonathan Bamba, you're getting 45 on Saturday. And so tell him that ahead of time, have him play his heart out for 45 minutes. If he's a difference maker, then that changes the game. And if he's not, too bad he's coming off at half either way, right? And I think that that's the frustrating thing from that perspective more than anything else. I think it's a very fair criticism, John.
Yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about the subs. The last thing I think I'd like to say, and it'll be kind of a common through line of this conversation, is like, I think one of the big things that excited me about the Greg Berhalter hire, obviously an incredible recruiter, has an eye for talents. And we've seen that, right? The other thing was he's an incredible knockout tournament coach. Not incredible, that's probably not fair, but a very good knockout tournament coach, right? And that's something you need in MLS, right? You need it because if you make the playoffs, it is just a straight up knockout tournament. And you need somebody who has experience with that. We've seen it with a guy, even in England, like Gareth Southgate, right? There was a level of what he brought to the table because he was skilled in those tournaments. And in like, that's kind of what also frustrates me about Greg is like, if you tell Greg, hey, you've got to win 4 games in 20 days, I think he can do that, right? I think if this team makes the playoffs, I don't think this is an MLS Cup team. Do I think they could punch above their weight? Yeah. Like, if nothing else, for the attacking and for his ability to coach a single game, I think he can do it. And the issue to me is when you look over the breadth of a season, it's like, yeah, man, you've got 2 games in 4 days and you need to figure out which one to prioritize and how to do so. And he kind of tries to outthink the room a little bit and say, well, actually, I can prioritize both games because if I start my starters and then I start my subs, I can just flip and flop and flop and flip and everything will be fine. And it's like, that's not quite how that works, unfortunately.
I'm not sure that that's an entirely fair criticism. I get your point again. And, but I do think that maybe that it was some hubris on his part to think that Cincinnati was a winnable game. And like, it was a winnable game for the Fire, right? Like they came within a goal. They were pressing for the equalizer. Maybe if not winnable, like it's arguably a game that I don't think anybody would have been mad if the Fire walked, like anybody from Cincinnati would have thought it was unfair for the Fire to walk away at the point, right? After that effort. And so I think maybe that like chasing that and wanting to prove that he could do that against a top team in the conference maybe got in his head a little bit, or, maybe not, but it just seems like that was where the tactical mistake sort of happened that set up some of the choices that he had to make on Tuesday. He was committing himself to making some difficult choices on Tuesday.
Yeah, and I think that's the point, right? It's like he made the point, I think, earlier in the year multiple times, like, we don't need to rest everybody, right? These guys can play multiple games in a week. They can kind of play these midweek games at full strength. And now we're not seeing that, right? And now it's, we're going to I don't want to say a game is meaningless, right? But we're kind of prioritizing a meaningless game versus what very well may be the only chance at silverware that the Fire will see, certainly this year. Maybe next year. Who knows if they're playing for the Open Cup again? Who knows if they're playing
Brimstone Cup erasure.
Fair point. But that's kind of where it lies for me. And that's actually a pretty good opportunity to talk about in-game management, right? And that is some of the substitutions made. TJ alluded to it earlier. The first one being Sam Rogers, which was kind of forced because the Fire needed help along that back line after Omar Gonzalez comes out from that red card, bringing off Marin Haile Selassie. You saw Hugo Kuipers coming on at half for Tom Barlow, which was expected. And then Sergio Orahel, Mauricio Pineda, Loreno, Leonardo Barroso, and Jonathan Bamba eventually coming in as well. And I think this is kind of a symptom of something.
And just to be clear,
about.
Jonathan Bamba was a forced sub in the 97th minute when the game had gone to extra time, yes. Where you do get an additional sub and an additional window. So I believe that means that the only unused sub from the Fire's bench was Jeff Gall.
Yep.
Yes.
So, yeah. And I think if you just want to go one by one, is that, not that I think it, at least window by window for the subs, right?
Yeah. Window by window was kind of one by one. The only double sub was Pineda and Barroso for Williams and Zinkernagel. Right. I think this to me is a little more. We'll read them off real quick, and I think then I'll give my main point. And then Tim, if you want to go bullet by bullet, you can. Sam Rogers for Marin Haile Selassie in the 30th minute. That was the Omar Gonzalez red card. Halftime, Hugo Kuipers for Tom Barlow. That was most likely planned. Sergio Orahel for Brian Gutierrez in the 67th minute. Mauricio Pineda and Sam Williams for Leonardo Barroso, or Mauricio Pineda and Leonardo Barroso, for Sam Williams and Philip Zinkernagel in the 72nd minute. That was the entirety of the game substitutions. Then the extra time substitution was Jonathan Bamba for Jay Davia, who tried to re-enter right before that Minnesota goal. And I think when you
Bamba
look at
tried to enter, Jay, you're right. Jay Davila tried to re-enter.
Bamba was not ready to enter, and that was when that goal occurred while the Fire were down 2 men. And the reason I wanted to do it all like that as opposed to going one by one, I think one by one, these make sense generally. The problem is it's similar to what we talked about a few weeks ago, right? Where now you're at the end of this game, you're at the 85th minute, and it's Hugo Kuipers all alone by himself up top with no help. You have no attacking or creative players available to step in next to him and actually make something happen. And we saw towards the end of extra time when Leonardo Barroso moved to the wing, and they were playing more a 4-2-3 as opposed to a 5-3-2 or 5-3-1, excuse me, that the Fire looked dangerous, right? They did. And so it's a little frustrating that, again, we're in this position where Hugo Kuipers is running his heart out and just can't get on the ball because nobody's making anything happen for him.
So yeah, I think that's why I think going one by one sort of makes the most sense, right? Because like that's the chronology of the decisions you had to make. I don't have a particular problem with the, taking Marin. I mean, you have to take someone off, right? And is going to be an attacking piece. You're not going to take off your other center back, right? To put on the center back from the bench. So like that had to happen to some extent. I do think that there's a little bit of like, in my mind, I was thinking, well, it's odd that it's Marin Haile Selassie who had some of the freshest legs out of any of the attacking pieces that the Fire had on the field, because it's not like he started on Saturday. And I was thinking, whoever you kind of like leave on in that position then has to be to some extent ready to go for 90 minutes, right? Because, that's about how long was left in the game if there was going to be extra time, which was always going to be a possibility, especially when, you were kind of going for that like sneak in to win down a man at that point. And so I thought that was kind of a curious option, right? Because, if Philip Zinkernagel had been able to go the 90, and maybe Greg didn't know, but it just seems less likely that he would have been able to, just given the minutes that he'd played. So that was my issue with that more than anything else. I don't think it's a huge problem, but I think it just goes to show what you were getting at, maybe a little bit of being a kind of tactical. It makes sense tactically in some sense, but it doesn't make sense strategically to look at the lineup that way.
Yeah, I think in some ways, like to your point, right? Like it's when you look at each one individually, they all kind of make sense. I agree. It's like that's a tough situation, right? Think of Philip Zinkernagel, arguably your best player, Marin Haile Selassie. So it's tough to kind of make that call. I've said before, I don't love the whole back five thing that he does when you're playing down a man. I would much rather see just a 4-2-3, keep your foot on the gas, right? For lack of a better word. I think, again, to me, it draws a little bit more of like, A, the roster construction as whole still has issues, but B, it does tie a little bit back to how you set yourself up, right? You have limited substitutions in the U.S. Open Cup. You only get a bench of 7 as opposed to a bench of 9. And again, like coming out of halftime that you need 4 more substitutions in this game. 3, I guess, if you're already accounting for the Kuipers and Barlow. And that's where, again, it frustrates me that we consistently get to the end of these games where you're down a man and you have a chance to either equalize or win, but you have no attacking players on the field. And that's where it's, why are we in the 90th minute with Mauricio Pineda and Jay Davia on the field? That doesn't make sense when you're trying to score a goal, right? And I think that's where a little bit more foresight, to me, would be helpful, right? Of like, what was the end game here when you made all these, like, there doesn't seem to be a clear, consistent thought in terms of planning ahead. And if the answer is like, you're just limited by the roster, then I suppose fair play, but it's frustrating from that perspective. And yeah, I think that's the only other thing I would say, I guess. And I am curious to hear your thoughts on this, Tim, and then we can kind of jump to San Diego, because I've been rambling at this point. At a certain point, they need, like, you're not stemming the tide, right? We talk about like that game was winnable. That game was winnable because they parked the bus for 60 minutes, right? There is an aspect to this game as well where it's like, hey man, what happens if you just put your foot on the gas, right? What happens if you go 4-2-3, throw somebody else up top and just put on the gas the rest of the way, try and score another goal as much as possible, and maybe see if you can put these guys away down a man. And I know that's a tough task, but so is holding the fort down for 90 minutes nearly, right? It's not exactly something that's going to be manageable for anybody down a man.
So I think that that's what you kind of have to do though. Like that's the point that I'd push back against you is that after the first sub was made where you had to bring on a center back, the Fire were up by a goal, through halftime. And I think that at that point you are to some extent really trying to just manage the result as much as you can. And that means being defensively as strong as possible, knowing that you could use a second goal. But I think that if you look at like where the Fire were playing on the pitch, they were willing to push. They were really intensive, I think, with the press. I'm a little surprised that Minnesota, who've been very good about catching teams out, trying to do that against them, didn't really have many opportunities doing that, with the exception of just like instantly off the restart in the second half. And so I think that was altogether a pretty impressive effort. And I don't really think that it's fair to say that they were really taking the, foot off the gas. I think that it comes down to a little bit of like, how much offensive upside do you think some of these guys necessarily have? But I think that we saw like Mauricio Pineda showing some of the offensive upside that he's got both this game and then like a little bit in the previous match as well. And, I think in the end, some parts of it were bodies, right? Like in a perfect world, this is a game where I think Kellen Acosta could show us if he can still shine for the Fire. It's unfortunate that he wasn't available because of an injury. But like, because he is, I think, still in a lot of ways, the most complete two-way midfield player, where he can pick moments to go forward. I don't think he gives you as much going forward as he does defensively, but it was about holding on to defend a lead while taking advantage of whatever chances they give you going the other way. I have fewer problems, I think, with the subs overall than you did. My biggest question is, why wait to take, it looked like Jay Davila was really struggling from like the 75th minute onwards, right? And so I think the idea that he could have gone another 45 minutes of competitive soccer was unlikely. You knew you had a sub. That sub was Bamba just because that's the guy you had on the bench. I don't know if it was like a prearranged, we're not going to use you Tuesday because we're going to use you Saturday. But the game was calling for it. I think that ended up needing to happen anyways. And if it just happened at the start of extra time, then there's a chance that additional goal doesn't happen and you've got an offensive difference maker on the pitch. Like, again, we don't know what would have happened. It just seems like that would have given the Fire a better chance to win. And it seemed like, I could tell from where I was that it needed to happen at some point because Jay Davila was just like clearly not able to keep up with the speed of the match.
Yeah, 100%. Can't disagree with you there. And valid points, I think. Just a little bit of maybe kind of boiled up frustration on my end, to be totally candid. I actually agree. I think like you bring on Davia right at the start of extra time. I think there's a very real chance, not Davia, excuse me, Bamba for Davia. There's a very real chance that game goes to penalties and then it's anybody's game, right? Although you are missing 2 of your 4 penalty takers, 3 of your 5, I guess, if you want to throw Tom Barlow in there, maybe. But hey, that's what more can you ask for in the Open Cup, right? That's why we enjoy it. We'll move on, though. We do want to talk a little bit of San Diego as well, as the Fire are welcoming the newest club in MLS into Soldier Field for the first time. It's just their second time east of the Mississippi since joining the league. Just to recap on San Diego, if you're not aware, they're awesome, right? A little bit shades of St. Louis when they joined, except actually good, if that makes sense, right? They did lose their most recent game 3-4 to the Dynamo at home, but that was only their second loss since the beginning of May. They're 8-1-2 in that stretch. They're the top team in the West. Anders Dreyer right now looks like one of, if not the best player in MLS. He is Rob, again, shout out friend of the show. I'm going to keep saying that, even if it's not true. Tom Bogert has him as the leader for the league MVP this year. Chucky Lozano has been Chucky Lozano, even though he's not available all the time. And so I guess you're welcoming in, again, a real rough stretch here, going Cincinnati, Minnesota, San Diego, 3 of the best teams in the league in a span of 7 days. Tim, how do you feel Greg and the team should respond after a pretty, given the effort, heartbreaking loss in the Open Cup?
So the other thing to note is Mikey Varas is the head coach of San Diego FC, who is sort of one of the one of the Greg Berhalter hires. He was a U.S. men's U20 national team coach. Before that, he was an assistant with Dallas, which obviously has a very, long story with his academy, which is where he was, I believe, initially. I don't know if he ever became an assistant coach there off the top of my head. And then for a hot minute there was the interim U.S. men's national team head coach in 2024. So, kind of not quite as much time with Greg as BJ Callahan had, but like one of the people that was brought on when that was sort of in Greg Berhalter's purview to do at the sort of top of the U.S. men's national team sporting side. So I think that's another interesting connection between the two teams. And it just has been so impressive. Like you said it, like they are a legitimately fantastic expansion team. Some have said the best ever. I think Fire fans more than anyone else will probably quibble with that to some extent. The Fire, I think, had a 20-12 record at a time when there were no draws. 2 of the wins, I think, were shootout wins, and I think so were 3 of the losses. So, like, San Diego are like more or less on the same trajectory. They would have to win hardware, I think, to make a legitimate claim of being better than the Fire. They've yet to do that. They very well could. I mean, it would not be surprising, I think, to anybody. And what's more than just them being this good, it's they haven't been playing paint by numbers, quick counter, surprise them with their pants down football the way that we sort of saw St. Louis do when they came in the league, right? Where it's like, this is not sustainable because no team has been able to sustain that and win championships. And San Diego's doing the opposite. They're playing like fun to watch, possession oriented football. And it's frankly, I mean, it's really refreshing to see. Just as like someone that has been watching games around the league.
Yeah, I think you said it really well. And I kind of jokingly alluded to it, but like this doesn't feel like a flash in the pan. They'll be mediocre next year. This feels like, have you just kind of on the fly built one of the better contending teams in MLS that we will see at the top of this?
And not entirely on the fly, right? Because one of the connections that the San Diego ownership group has is to the Right to Dream Academy. And so they've got connections to a global sporting network that kind of goes for, like, really, I mean, you can Google it for those that don't know it. But I mean, their mission is, I think, to develop, people as much as it is players and give people opportunities around the world that through the sport that they wouldn't otherwise have. And that, I think, it's really cool the way that they're going about it. And San Diego is very plugged into that. They, I think, are the first MLS team that from the get-go is being established with an academy that is sort of like built for there being kids in the academy from like far and wide. Like they're building dormitories and stuff like that into the academy with the idea of bringing people from around the world to be able to live in San Diego, grow with the team and the squad, be able to compete. And if that ends up not being their path, then go on to school afterwards, which is cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you think about the long term and kind of the wider look at this team, right? The record with and without Chucky Lozano is still impressive, right? They're not reliant on one of their 2 DPs. They had the chance to sign Kevin De Bruyne and said, no, thank you. We don't need you. We don't want you. We don't think this is a worthwhile investment for us. So I think to your point, Tim, like a really intelligently run team, a really thoughtfully crafted team in how much you can do that for an expansion side. And it just kind of rings another question here of, I think looking at this game Saturday and, we kind of have the question of like, what changes in the lineup do we see? Do we going to have some rotation? How are the players going to be feeling? I think this could be as simple as like, I think one team just has better players right now, as crazy as that sounds. You look at the overall 1 through 31 on the roster, and I don't know how well the Fire stack up against San Diego right now. I think motivation-wise, this was probably a blow for the team. I don't expect them to have super high spirits coming back, even though they will be at home. Chris Brady is back. Hopefully there's a little bit of renewed focus, but I do worry that this could be really poor timing of like, man, you just had what was probably your most heartbreaking loss this season. And now you have maybe the best team in MLS coming into your home where you haven't played well. And you got to you got to hope you're not suffering through 90 minutes.
But I mean, that's one way of looking at it. I hope that's not the way that the Fire are looking at it, because I think the other way that you can look at it is, if you're anyone other than Omar Gonzalez, you're probably thinking this, like, Minnesota's a team that a lot of people around the league are talking about because of how good they are. And we know that the Fire have struggled to get results against the top teams in the league. It's something that Greg has talked about. It's something that, people that talk about the league have talked about. And it just is something that, like, anyone that's been watching this team kind of knows, right? Like, the game against Cincinnati, they came close. They didn't do it. Like, the game, the most recent game against Nashville, they didn't get embarrassed, but they still lost 2-0. And the game before that against Nashville, we know what happened. They've been able to put together impressive wins against teams that are under that tier, but not wins against teams that are in that tier. People have been putting Minnesota in that tier, and it just felt like a winnable game. So where I'm hoping that most of the squad is they're just thinking, we are pissed. We're pissed that we were denied the chance at an 11 man on 11 man competition for 90 minutes, because we would have won that competition. And I hope that's where the mentality's at. And I think if you're pissed, right, like, that can lead to problems, like, for example, red cards, but it can also lead to guys being focused and really honed in on their performance. Chris Brady seemed eager and enthusiastic to get back between the pipes for this one. And I think that that's something like we've all seen the pluses and minuses of a pissed off Chris Brady over the years. Has he gotten a red card? Yes. Was it intentional? No. But there was aggressive play from him, and we've seen him make phenomenal saves when he's being aggressive, and we've seen him make mistakes. And hopefully everyone can keep it on the right side of that. And if that's where the team is, I think that's probably their best chance at a result against a San Diego team that I think at this point it's hard for top teams in the league to stay focused, because you're kind of competing against yourself more than anyone else at that point. And it's just as hard to stay 100% locked in for a 34-game season through the heat of the summer and all of that.
Yeah, and I guess this is where I'll throw something out there. Would love your opinion on it, and then we can kind of move a little bit. But I think this is, and I don't mean to be overly focused on one thing today, but this feels a little bit like a Greg Berhalter game, right? We've seen this team come out flat, I think, multiple times this year. I mean, the obvious one is Nashville, right? But the game against Philadelphia, the game against Montreal, they just did not look like themselves. We'll say it that way. This is a game where if you can't get up for one of the best teams in the league coming into your house, which I guess we saw against Philadelphia, as I'm saying that, I don't know what's going to get you out of bed, man. Like, this feels a little bit like we've talked about Greg Berhalter kind of navigating the motivations of this team, kind of a lot of different players. I think this is going to come down to how good do the guys look when they step onto the field? How mentally prepared are they to go to war for 90 minutes? To your point, Tim, are they channeling their frustration and what I would imagine is some anger on that result into something positive, which is being locked in, focused, doing their job? Or are they putting it into something like, but with a guy's head, you know what I mean? So I think this could end up being a Berhalter game. And for, time's sake, I'll say my other thought would be, this is a game where I would maybe consider resting Andrew Gutman. I don't know if that's a crazy thing to say. I thought the game against Minnesota was very poor from him, and I would much rather see either Barroso or Dean on the left, the other on the right, let Gutman have a night off and kind of see if you can just change something up, give the man a rest, and kind of see what happens. Every now and then you look down while I'm saying something, and I can never tell if you're just focusing or really hate what I said. I'm
thinking about it. No, I mean, honestly, I think that Greg is probably going to put close to his best 11 and go for it. And I mean, maybe that's the thing that we didn't piece together before of is this another one of those, he wants to have a result against a guy that he knows coaching the other team. I mean, I don't know how much of that's really in his head. Mm-hmm. To be honest, though, I'm with you overall. I think if you look at the roster 1 through 30, I think that San Diego just has a better roster. And I think that they've been playing well together. And a lot of people have talked about how hard it is to take something that doesn't exist and with a clean sheet of paper, basically build it up, which is what you do with an expansion team, and make it work at the beginning. But I think in some ways it's even harder to take a broken machine and get it running when you can't really replace all the parts, right? Like cars run new out of the factory a lot better than they do when they've got 100,000 miles on them and have been broken multiple times and in multiple accidents, no matter how good a mechanic you've got working on them. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's the challenge that Greg has had to face. And I think that he's made a lot of progress in that regard. But honestly, like some part of me is like, look, this is the 21st game of the regular season. There's 13 games left after this. It's not the end of the world if there isn't a result here. So what I really would like to see from the Fire is just them playing for it, going for it, and not making some of the mistakes that have cost the team so far. Like if they can play a defensively competent game and still show us some of the potential on the other side of the ball that we've seen the team put together, I'll honestly, I'll think that that's a pretty good result from the Fire. I think that, that should be enough to go home happy for most of the players. And then when you look at the schedule after this, it suddenly looks like it's a lot easier. The next couple games are away, but it's away at Atlanta United, away at CF Montreal. Like these are not shaking my boots teams in MLS this season by any stretch of the imagination. Home against the Red Bulls, home against LAFC that have been in a little bit of a nosedive. Like it's at home against St. Louis, which they've also been pretty bad this year. Like the team, I think, needs to put results together in those games. And I just want to see progress that will make me believe that they can put those results in this next game on Saturday.
100%. I think more than anything to me, yeah, I agree with you. I think that's a really well put point. Kind of alluding to what I said before a little bit about do what you do well at a high level. Would love to see the offense click, right? Would love to see Hugo Kuipers put one in the back of the net in a game that matters, right? At a game that's in the balance. And just maybe see Sam Rogers play a solid 90 minutes. Like it's okay to lose if you play your best and they play their best and you are the worst team.
Yeah, and this could also be a game
sport,
like
right?
We've wanted, like, I would like to see some real production out of Jonathan Bamba. Like we've seen him get chances, we've seen him sky some chances, we've seen him wait too long and do a weak cross for someone that's not there. Like the guy clearly has the skill to be doing more. And I've said before, like it's not realistic to expect the guy to get 20 goals in a season because he's never done that before and he's not going to start now. But I think we can see more from him than we have. So just seeing a good performance from him that like actually gives fans at home a chance to see some of what he was showing like in that season opener in Columbus, right? Would be, I think, a good step forward for the rest of the season.
Absolutely. And I mean, I don't mean to pick on anybody, but like if you're looking at that San Diego back line and there's one weakness, is it Oscar Verhoeven? Like it might be, is Jonathan Bamba going to have some opportunities down the left side? I think he very well may, right? So I think it's a great call out there, Tim. It feels as good a place as any to kind of wrap things and we can get on to, I think, the most important question, the only question that really matters when it comes down to it. And that is, Tim, who you got?
I'm going to say a 2-2 draw because at some point, like draws happen in MLS and it just seems like that would almost feel like a trap game for San Diego at this point. Coming off a loss, coming into Chicago, teams losing focus a little bit maybe on both sides, and that could be something.
Important to note, that is not what Tim wrote in the outline. So changing on the fly there. I appreciate it. He might have talked himself into that. DJ.
That was DJ wrote in the outline.
Yeah,
so.
I was about to say.
I totally misread that. Sorry, everybody.
Yeah, I'm saying it's still a 3-1 loss because I don't think it's going to be a bad game for the Fire necessarily, but I think San Diego is just that good of a team.
Yeah, and I think that's, to be honest with you, DJ, I am in a very similar boat. I have 4-2 San Diego. I think there's a very real chance that like both teams look good and San Diego is just better. Like, and that fourth goal in my mind is like 93rd minute on a breakaway. Chris Brady just gets 2-on-1 and can't do anything, right? So yeah, I got 4-2 San Diego. I don't think it's a bad game necessarily, but like I mentioned before, I think it's all about how they actually turn out for it. Fellas, anything else we want to toss in before we wrap up and send it off to the great big editor in the sky? Shout out Austin.
Are we not even going to talk about Danny Lux? Or no, I'm kidding.
Am I gonna? Okay, actually, important to note, like the entire north end of the stadium will be empty because I guess they're putting the stage there. So kind of weird vibes, Don't know.
Yeah, I think that they saw, when the team traveled to Dallas and they saw half the stadium cordoned off because they're doing renovations. They're like, huh, cool, we could do that.
Well, to be fair, right? You go to SeatGeek, you win 4-0. Maybe they're like, hey, let's try something different here.
Yeah, like these guys, we're getting a new stadium soon. These guys need the experience of playing in a stadium with a stage at one end as much as possible. It'll build character.
Is there going to be a stage at one end?
I think that's the north end of not of the new Fire Stadium. I'm saying this Chicago Fire Heritage because there's one at SeatGeek.
Yes. Okay. I was like, did I miss something in the renders?
Yeah. They're not gonna have a stage at one end of the new stadium. So like then that means there's going to be guys that have never seen that happen, and now there'll be more people that'll see it happen.
There you go. But if you weren't aware, there is a free concert right after the game. Well, free if you have a ticket to the game, right? Danny Luck's performing after the Fire game Saturday, so stick around. I think it'll be a pretty poppin' crowd overall. I can't say that all of them will be rooting for the Fire, but there will be people there. Anywho, that is where we'll wrap up today. Thank you so much for joining us again around the bonfire. As always, tune in to your socials. Men in Red 97 is where you can find all of our work. Our writing is on meninred97.com. That's Tim, that's Alex, that's Max, myself occasionally as well. That's where you can find all the latest updates, roster moves, as we're getting ready for the transfer window to open. 15 days, folks. 15 days as of recording is when the transfer window will open, and Chicago Fire can finally sign that one obscure Croatian midfielder that you all really, really love. But keep your eyes peeled.
Heights is gone, but that's not. We're not looking in the Bulgarian 4th division anymore as a city.
Fair enough. I will say, once again, Sergio Ramos was available, and we just didn't sign him. But that's fine. We'll move on.
Sign him yet.
What's the fee? It can't be that high. He's 40. Anyway. But yeah, please stay tuned to the website. That's where you'll find all the best stories, all the best updates. You can tune in here. We'll be back for the review of San Diego. That'll be this Sunday. We'll be filming, so it goes up typically on Mondays. So keep your eyes out for that as well. Hopefully, we'll be reviewing a Chicago Fire victory. And as always, thank you for listening. We wouldn't be doing this if people weren't tuning in. So thanks for that. For Tim, for DJ, for our illustrious producer, Austin, who makes us sound good and doesn't play any practical jokes on me. Thank you so much for joining us around the bonfire. Come on, you men in red.